all of us at KPMG, Angus, warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be with you today, to share whatever I can to be helpful with you. Of course, I think we're going to focus the conversation on flow, but I did spend 20 years of my formative life in a very similar kind of environment. And I saw the highs and I saw the lows, I saw the winners and I saw the losers. And so I'm very happy also just to have a broader conversation about how to flourish and be successful in your kind of environment.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angus. So let's start from the basics, Angus. Tell us, what is this whole thing about being in the flow, and how different is it? Is it just another fancy term that theorists are now calling out, or is it different, and how different is it from being, let's say, mindful, for instance?
Yeah, so it's actually, there's a very clear distinction, which is worth explaining. The term flow was coined by Professor Mihai Csikszentmihalyi from University of Chicago in 1990. And he was studying people who seemed to be at their happiest when they were deeply immersed in an activity. And so the term that we all tend to use for this is somebody who's in the zone. I'm sure you're familiar with that term. If you're playing a sport or maybe just playing a puzzle with your kids and you can lose track of time. And the key distinction between mindfulness here is that flow is a form of mindfulness in action. It's when you're actually doing something. So you don't have to be sitting in a yoga position, meditating, or to be mindfully engaged. When you're in flow, you're perhaps playing a sport or deeply engrossed in a game, or at work trying to optimize a new procedure, and you're so immersed in it that maybe you don't notice that 3 hours have gone by, or perhaps somebody calls your name and you didn't hear it. Perhaps they called your name several times and you just didn't hear it. So this is the phenomenon we're talking about, and it has lots of relevancy for our daily work lives, which I'm sure we'll be coming on to.
Yeah, but in times like these, it almost seems like a luxury to talk about, doing one thing and being focused on that one thing. How relevant do you think it is for us to talk about this now?
Yeah, I think it's extremely relevant at all times, and particularly relevant now while we're working from home, and we can come back and talk about this in a bit more detail. But I think the big idea about flow is it combines two things. It combines them simultaneously. So both peak experience, so this is the benefit you get from mindfulness and meditation and happiness, but also peak performance immediately. And so this idea that somehow investing ourselves and investing in our performance are somehow opposites is actually factually wrong. We can actually have the peak performance right now whilst having a peak experience at the same time. And this is something that we should all be seeking to do more of. There are challenges with it, but as a matter of principle, we should definitely be seeking to do more of this. And in a way, the idea of flow defies this idea of no pain, no gain. I'm sure you've heard that expression. This idea that somehow that you have to suffer in order to progress and improve in performance. And really what flow is saying, no, you don't actually have to suffer at all. You can have that peak experience whilst enhancing your performance.
So you say flow actually enhances productivity, but tell us how. I mean, can flow be measured? I mean, can someone be on a 10-point scale high, 9 out of 10 on flow, or 3 out of 10? How does one measure something like this?
No, yes. So let's talk about this. The first thing is to say that the benefits of flow are many. There is a productivity benefit. There's also a health and immune system benefit. There's a creativity and spontaneity benefit. Maybe I can just share with you a story from my previous life when I was at McKinsey and working very hard. And in the habit of taking early morning flights to go and visit my client who was based in Scandinavia, which is a 90-minute flight away. And I would have a 9 a.m. meeting with him once a week So I would get the 7 a.m. flight, which meant that I was getting up at maybe 4:45 in the morning. And this was a habit that I did for literally years. And I always had that slightly tired feeling. You can feel it in the top of your head and below your eyes when I was going into my CEO meetings. And they seemed to be perfectly adequate meetings. I didn't know any better until something changed. My life circumstances changed a little bit. So it wasn't through my own choice, although if I'd been more aware of myself, perhaps it should have been. But I started taking the afternoon flight the day before. And so I'd arrive in Scandinavia in around 5, 6 o'clock, spend some time with my team, go to bed, have a good night's sleep, and wake up, not at 4:45, but at a normal time, and just feeling fresh. And with the same 9 a.m. CEO meeting, with the same type of document to present, I was a different person. I was energetic. I was spontaneous. I was daring, courageous. And these conversations went off into a completely different space. And finally, we achieved flow together, and really got the benefits of creativity and spontaneity just because the positive energy was there. So flow is a lot about these types of benefits. And your question is, can we measure it? And the answer is yes, but perhaps not in the way you're thinking. So the research scientists, they definitely know how to measure flow. You can see it in your brain patterns. By the way, in the same way that when you're meditating, you can see it very clearly in your brain patterns. And you can even bring about physical change to your brain if you meditate very regularly. So yes, that's measurable. And the scientists also have other tools that allow them to spontaneously test with people whether they're experiencing flow. But for us as human beings, we have a basic challenge with asking ourselves, am I in flow now? Because the very point, if you ask yourselves that question, you're going to take yourself out of the flow state. So the way to think about flow is not testing myself right now, am I in flow, but rather afterwards to note that you're in flow. And there are some telltale signs, one of which is time just passes really quickly. What you thought maybe was going to take half an hour became something completely different. And 2.5 hours later, you're still doing, but you barely notice the time passing. That's such a telltale sign of flow. And you achieve so much more than you ever thought would have been possible. So yes, there are ways to sort of look at yourself and say, yes, I've been experiencing flow. That's a great thing.
So you're saying achieving far more than you thought you'd expect in the same amount of time, and that's when you know you are in the flow.
Well, I mean, that's one of the benefits. I think you know you're in flow when you see that you've lost track of time. That's the sort of the killer test. Now there are some challenges, and I think maybe this will come in.
Some challenge. Yeah. I mean, if it's so good, then why don't we get to it? What are the challenges you can tell us?
Yeah, so there are a couple of really important challenges. One is that we have calendars that break our day up into time slots. And so the very notion of losing track of time when you have a day that's comprised of 10 successive Zoom calls, for example, or other such clearly delineated time activities, it's very, very difficult to let go. And so one of the most important necessary conditions for flow is to release those constraints that stop you getting in that state. And one of them is the thought that you're going to have to stop and go and do something else. So there are some tips and tricks we can talk about that to help you work around that. But there's another obstacle to flow, and this is simply distractions and interruptions. We live in a world that is soliciting us non-stop. We're getting beeps and notifications all the time. People walk in and put their head around the door all the time. People just have one question. If you just got 1 second, and of course you got 1 second, but if you leave your flow state for that 1 second, it takes up to 20 minutes to get back into that flow state again. So that cost of the 1 second isn't 1 second to you, it may be 20 minutes to you. Now, of course, that 1 second may be very valuable to the other person. That's another question, but that's part of the trade-off. And so we are increasingly finding it difficult to enter into a state of flow. Just ask yourselves, each of you on this call, when was the last time that you sat down and read a book for a whole hour, a novel type of book, and you got lost in the story of the book for a whole hour without, on one single occasion over the course of that hour, letting your mind wander because something beeped at you or you had a thought that took you away? Now, we have really lost this ability. We've lost a muscle, actually, which is this muscle of mindful engagement. And so, of course, distractions are a big part of the cause of this, and technology, of course, is a part of that as well.
Great. So you say that the obstacles are you saying the obstacles are purely external, the distractions and the fact that your day is broken down, or is there something more internal to being in flow?
No, I think it's, so we can discuss both of these. So I think the obstacles clearly are external, and an organization can think systemically about what can we do to foster an environment where flow is going to be more possible. So one of the obvious ones is to adapt the environment to regulate interruptions. So some companies have a signaling system, even if it's just putting a tennis ball on your desk, saying, when this tennis ball is sitting on my desk, that means please do not interrupt me. So you can have a certain rules and regulations just to sort of regulate when I'm in and when I'm not in flow. But there's more to it than this. We can think about the work that we give to people, and most importantly, how challenging is this work? Because there's a very clear link between the challenge of the work and our ability to enter flow. And what the sweet spot is to have work that's genuinely challenging, but not too challenging. Because if work is too challenging, then we become anxious. And when we're anxious, that inhibits our ability to enter that state. And when the work is too easy for us, in other words, our skill level is too high for the work, then we get bored. And so it's important that a company, an environment is sensitive to just the right type of challenge to people to foster the entering of that flow. And then another thing that we can do at work is help people think differently about the meaning of their work. Now, it's true that at work, there are times when we do things where it's difficult to find the bigger meaning in what we're doing. Now, of course, if you're working in a hospital and saving lives every day, that might be relatively easy. But if you're working in a more routine environment, or perhaps working in a bank doing something very repetitive, you might find it quite difficult to find meaning in your work. But there's some meaning of your work. But there's an opportunity here to draw a very nice little distinction between meaning of your work and meaning in your work. And this is this idea that we can all enter a state of flow, even if we're doing routine tasks. And let me give you a very real example from right now in my life. So like everybody else, I'm at home. And my wife sort of thought it would be good if I actually do my fair share of certain household tasks that ordinarily I wouldn't particularly get involved in. I'm, it's rather a shame to say, but that's the way it is. And so I've started doing things like emptying our dishwasher and putting all of the cups and saucers and spoons and plates away. And my wife was rather hoping that I'd find this really frustrating and annoying as she does. But I kind of found it like an optimization game. It's like a lean optimization. How quickly can I do this? knowing where the cups are over here, the spoons are over here. If I open the cupboard beforehand, then I can do this more quickly. And I'd been in this frenzy of optimization and really enjoying it, which was quite good for me. It's also good for our home because this menial task was dispatched of more quickly. I think my wife was a little frustrated that I seemed to be enjoying this thing. But what I was doing here is finding meaning in my work, which is a very clear distinction to there's not a lot of meaning in emptying the dishwasher in the biggest sense of the term. So these are some of the things that we can do at a sort of environmental level to foster this type of thinking. And then there are things that we can do as individuals. And the example I want to sort of share with you is, I want you to remember the last time you were, of course, this isn't happening at the moment, but the last time you're on a long plane flight for work. Let's say at least a 5 or 6 hour long plane flight. And I want you to ask yourselves, because I know this has happened to me so many times, have you ever been working on the plane and just achieved so much in a space of perhaps 2 or 3 hours that would never, ever happen in normal life? The creativity, the productivity, the intensity, the attention to detail. And the thing is, what's going on here is the plane environment forces upon you a certain number of conditions that really make flow very easy to achieve. And what we need to do in our daily lives is replicate some of those things. So the first thing is no disruption, no interruptions. Nobody can come over to you on the plane and tap you on the shoulder and say, have you got a second? Secondly, there's no distractions in the form of the internet, because there is no, well, usually there is no internet on planes. I guess that won't last forever. And then thirdly, on a plane, if it's a long flight, you have an open-ended calendar. That's why I said a longish flight. So you have time just to sort of release this constraint of worrying about whether you have enough time. These are some of the things that we need to try to replicate for ourselves when we're trying to enter into our own state of flow, day in, day out. And at the moment, we're all at home, so that's so important.
Fantastic. Great. So you just spoke about creating zones where you're not disturbed, finding greater meaning in what you're doing, and finding that time when you are completely there's no potential of you being disturbed whatsoever. Great points there, Angus. Many on this call, in fact, all of us are leaders in our own right. If we had to do this and kind of take this culture down to the team members, can you suggest 3-4 things that we can tell teams, or maybe even children or siblings at home about how to be in that flow of heightened productivity?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say, and in a way, I'm already sort of reflecting a little bit back on when I was myself in the professional services environment. The first thing is to introduce an idea, which is that of the personal operating model. It was only when I realized that I had a personal operating model of my own that I ended up taking responsibility for my own personal development. Until that moment, I was trying my best to get promoted, to understand what the criteria were for promotion, and essentially doing whatever it takes by responding to some external set of stimuli that were guiding my development. But the day I realized that there is this personal operating model, and therefore I'm taking responsibility, was a huge moment for me. And so just introducing that language, and with it, inciting people to take responsibility for their development, I think is a very, very important notion. And then with this idea, I think is also talking about the size of the prize. What we're talking about here isn't simply a 10% increase in performance, or maybe a 40%. And of course, I'm speaking schematically here. It's difficult really to truly measure these things. But what we're really talking about here is an entirely transformed personal operating model. It's the difference between functioning and truly flourishing. This is what we're seeking here. In our Tal, who's my colleague, my co-founder of Potential Life, he and I we've written all this down in a book, and in the book we tell the story of the book through two individuals. One individual, her name is Felicity, and the other is Tristan, and they have the same age. They're working in the same company. They're in the same job at the same level, and yet they had the same university degree and the same career progression to date. So on paper, very, very similar environments. And yet Felicity is on fire, and she's clearly doing something right, whereas Tristan is just struggling to keep his head above water. Felicity will go on to become CEO of the company, whereas Tristan will flounder. And it's by pulling apart some of the fundamental differences you see in Felicity's operating model that you can really see the power of this flourishing and flow enriched leadership. And I can elaborate on a few of those if you think that would be interesting.
Wow, that's very, very interesting. So when you say it's not about just being a leader, but it's about being a flourishing leader. So tell us more, and can you draw on examples on the personal operating model that you spoke about?
Yes, of course. I mean, let's. The first thing I'd like to say is on this is the question should not be, am I a leader? Today we live in a world where anybody can choose not to be led by you. We're in a very mobile, flexible work environment where people can just get up and walk. They can vote with their feet. So the question is not, am I a leader? It's rather, why would anybody actually want to be led by me? And what is it that you do as a flourishing leader to create that appetite? And there's sort of several things that you can do. Each of which, by the way, has particular relevance right now when we're at home. So maybe I could just sort of share a few thoughts to sort of put some meat behind this, what it means to be a flourishing leader, and in particular why they're relevant now.
Yes.
Let me start with energy. Leaders tend to be energetic people. It's very tempting when you see an energetic person to say, oh, aren't they lucky? It must be in their DNA, or maybe it's God-given. You might even find them a little bit annoying, all this energy they seem to be having. Well, that would be an error to view things this way, because we all own our own energy levels. However, until recently, we didn't need to think too much about this, because we had a formula that we could use that helped us when it came to balance and quality of life. And that formula, which was not a good formula, was work-life balance. Now, the problems with work-life balance are huge. Number one, it kind of suggests that it's a zero-sum game. You know, what I balance from one goes into the other. It also tends to demonize work a little bit, because I kind of somehow need to get away from the devil of work into the heaven of home in order to be ready to confront the devil of work again. All of which are fundamentally unhealthy thoughts, because it is possible to have more energy, so it's not a zero-sum game. And work is one of the most important things in our lives for all of us. And by the way, whoever said that our home lives weren't stressful as well? So lots of challenges with this old formula. Now, the thing is, right now, we're all at home. And so we can just throw that formula right out the window, because everything is completely topsy-turvy on top of each other. So now we're in a moment where not only we can choose to have a different framing for this, but in reality, we have no choice. And the revised framing is to say, let's forget work-life balance as a concept and say, hang on a second, what's really going on here is the relationship between my energy level and my ability to embrace stress. In other words, when I'm feeling drained, I can't handle any more stress. But when I'm feeling energized, I'm ready to take that stress on, I'm ready to engage, and so on and so forth. So the true answer to all of this, for all of us, is to actually take ownership of your recovery. This is the thing that fuels up your energy level again, and that way you can embrace stress. And working from home is a very real example. I mean, I don't know how you feel, but Zoom is a fantastic tool, and now is not the time to be criticizing Zoom. We're all benefiting massively from it. But a lot of people have said to me that after a day of Zoom meetings, they feel completely drained, and in an unexpected way. And there's a couple of things going on here with Zoom calls. The first is we tend to be more than averagely mindfully engaged in these calls, because there's a policing mechanism of looking each other in the eyes and so on. Of course, I can't look at you all in the eyes now, but if there were just the four of us, we'd be making sure that we're all engaged. Whereas in a physical meeting, you can kind of check out a bit, you can go grab a coffee, and there's much more sort of little micro recovery moments. And then the second thing with Zoom is we're all giving so much energy to this screen in order to make these meetings work. But the screen doesn't give us any energy back, really. Whereas when we're in a physical meeting, we take lots of energy as well as giving it. And so a lot of people are saying, by the end of the day, I'm completely exhausted. Maybe much more productive, but also completely exhausted. So one of the things we need to really dare to tell ourselves is, give yourself permission to take a break. Every break should be viewed not as slacking. I don't know if you're familiar with that expression, slacking, but rather an investment in your performance. And I so wish I'd known this. Again, going back to those many hours of my life spent on planes on a Friday afternoon when I felt exhausted, and through a sense of guilt, I felt like I had to do a piece of work. If I didn't do it, I felt bad about it. Now, there was a completely alternative framing available to me that I didn't know about. It was Friday afternoon. I was going home to see my family. I'd been away for 4 days. Wouldn't it be good for everybody if I walked to that door feeling fresh because I had a nap on the plane, and sort of just emptied my stress out, had a great weekend, and then go back pumped up for a great week of work ahead? I didn't have the language nor the tools or the framing available to me to help me with that. So that's, I think, a very important consideration for all of us in these days. So that was one topic. I'm not quite sure how we're doing with questions. I'm just, because I'm talking a bit here, I really want to encourage everybody to just write your questions in if you're not already doing so. I'd love to get an opportunity just to sort of engage the conversation. I've got lots of more things to talk about. Maybe I'll just hand back over to you, because you maybe want to guide me a little bit in terms of where I take this conversation.
Yes, Angus. In fact, we have questions coming up, and I want to tell our participants that please fill in more as we go along. But I just want to conclude what you just said, Angus, that your operating model then is a combination of giving it energy, giving it accountability and ownership, and telling yourself that, giving yourself the permission to take breaks, or what you call temporary slack every now and then. Is that how you have reframed your times now?
No, it's definitely what I was talking about, and definitely a very real part of it. But I kind of cut myself short a little bit, because I was a little bit worried about going on too long. But I can happily offer another couple of thoughts as well that are just as important. One in particular on relationships. I remember when I was a junior consultant at McKinsey, one of my partner bosses said to me, "You need to build a network, because the team members of today will be your CEO clients in 10, 15, 20 years time." Now, this is a piece of advice that I did not really adhere to. I did partially, but nowhere nearly as much as I could have, and for sure should have. And The reason why I think, looking back on why I did not do this, is the term build your network just sounded so sterile and mechanical to me.
Mm.
And indeed, if my partner boss had said to me, go out and turn those client team members into friends, which I happened to do for 1 or 2 people, then 10, 20 years later, I would have had thousands of CEO clients. One particular example of mine was so I'm British, but at that time I was living in France and actually finding it quite difficult adapting to French culture. And one of my client team members, he was a German called Jürgen Kriegerskotter. And he was recently arrived in France and also found it difficult. And we just struck up a relationship, a friendship, because we were just comparing notes on how horribly difficult it is to live in France. And we stayed friends, and he became a client 10 years later. And the key point here was the word relationship and friendship is so much more powerful than building your network. And I think especially in today's world, where many of the old organizational structures have simply gone, and the glue of the 21st century organization really is relationships. And I don't mean network, I don't mean acquaintances, I mean people who are your buddies, people who when you call for a favor, they're going to give you that favor without expecting to call it back. It's true generosity and friendship. And I think that's a very, very important thing for not only for how we enjoy our life, of course, but for how we'll end up developing as leaders.
Thank you. Thank you, Angus. That for some more insight on your personal operating model. That was a question that Divya Seth asked, and you answered that. I'm going to take some more questions from the Q&A. Vikram Surana, he asks, is physically and being fully engrossed, is that what flow means?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry, because there's a little sound problem.
Okay. Vikram's question is flow the state of being at your best, both psychologically and physically, and being fully engrossed? Was my audio all right?
Yes, I would say I would say deeply immersed in an activity, and that way you combine the mindfulness side of deep immersion with the activity side as well. So yes, so that pretty much captures the essence of the question, very much so.
Moving to the next question then, Rupesh asks, Angus, can you share the story or case of any organization where you may have witnessed a dramatic shift in employee state of flow because of the interventions done by that organization?
Yes, indeed. Let me tell you the story of a supermarket chain in England. You may know this company if you've ever been to England. The company is called Sainsbury's, and they are basically the largest supermarket chain in the country. And I want to tell you the story of a lady who was shelf stacking at Sainsbury's. So her job was to stand on a ladder stacking shelves every day. Now, I was lucky enough, and her name was Lydia, and I was lucky enough to meet Lydia. I was doing some store visits, this was a few years ago, and the store manager, without explaining anything to me, just said, go over and have a chat with Lydia. So I go over and say hello to Lydia, and in front of me, this shelf stacker was this most warm, engaging person I've spoken to for a long, long time. And after we chatted, and she was so warm and engaging and present for me. We chatted for a minute or two, but I just wanted to keep on chatting with Lydia. And so I thought that was very interesting. So I went back to the store manager and said, she's amazing, but what's the deal? And he goes, let me explain. Now, we have lots of protocols, as you would expect in retail, because retail is detail. lots of protocols for when we have angry customers. So, you know, let's say when we have a broken product, we have this protocol. Or when the bill was wrong, we have this protocol. And of course, we do all of that. But we notice something. In our store, if ever we have an angry customer, if we just let Lydia go over and chat to this customer for a minute or two, then most of the times the problem just goes away. And so we're not abandoning the protocols, but we're recognizing that Lydia has this character strength of warmth and social intelligence, of really giving herself to the other person with a true mindful engagement to the conversation, that it had a huge beneficial effect. What's really interesting is when you speak to Lydia and ask her, what is your job? She doesn't actually say, I'm stacking shelves. She says, I'm helping to create this happy atmosphere among the customers in the store. That's her job definition. And this gives her, she gets to play to her strength. This energizes her, and it enables her to interact authentically and positively with these clients as well. And so I went and was lucky enough to share this story with the CEO of the company and the board. And they looked at each other in the eyes and they said, wow, just imagine what Sainsbury's would be if we had 161,000, which is the number of employees they have, Lydias. Just imagine what this store would be. And at this moment in time, Sainsbury's was going through a transformation where the new battlefields were the small local corner shops. The large stores are closing down because people use technology now for deliveries, but then they top up in the local store on the way home. And the CEO said, these stores have become so granular that we can no longer fully protocolize everything. So we're just going to have to rely on people being engaged, agile, resilient, thinking on their feet. And so they deployed a program, really a cultural transformation program, to help people find the way of being the best version of themselves, authentic selves, so that they can really engage and foster flow with the customers. So yeah, so I think
wow.
many companies are really now starting to see the benefits of this, and so that's just one example for you.
That's a beautiful story. So were they able to then create 161,000 Lydias? Did you know where that went?
Yeah, they did. So first of all, they emphasized what Lydia represents. So they elevated the Lydia story in the corporate narrative, and they deployed a cultural transformation program involving thousands of people, in particular through the leadership model of each store manager. So that was considered to be the pivotal role in the organization. If we have store managers who are fostering this type of operating mode, then the flowers will bloom appropriately.
Wow, wow. So the Q&A box is filling up, Angus, and I want to be mindful of time.
Yeah, I
So
can see one.
Let's keep going.
Can I? Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
No, do you want to pick up a question? I'm happy if you want to do it that way. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, actually, because there's a question, I just wanted to say a little bit more on, the question was, please elaborate on various parameters of personal operating model. And I'm not going to go back and describe some of the content, but I just wanted to say a little bit more about what do we actually mean by personal operating model. And I think, you know, the important thing is this all starts off with a recognition that we are, as human beings, we're creatures of habit. John Dryden, who is the first ever poet laureate, which is the poet of the King or the Queen of England, he said in 1531, we first make our habits, but then it's our habits that make us. And it's only when you realize that the answer to all personal development acknowledges this, and therefore comes through a process through which we shift our habit set. And now when you look at it from a neuroscience point of view, what does one do to change habits? The best way to think of this is a bit like, imagine a mountain side with water going down in streams. And as more water goes down those streams, the gullies become deeper and deeper and more entrenched. And these are your habits. It's a visual metaphor, but it's actually a good one for what goes on in our brain. So if you want to change your behavior, you have to deviate the water a little bit. And so it starts going down a little, perhaps slightly unnatural path. Then after a while, that path becomes deeper and entrenched, and you've created a new habit. This is how we need to be thinking about making changes to our habit set, which is our personal operating model. You need to start with small changes. It's very important, small. We need to celebrate the small stuff and view small changes a bit like compound interest accumulating in your bank account. So don't be shy if you want to lose weight of starting off by eating an apple. It has to start somewhere. Celebrate the apple. And then you need to repeat. And you need to keep repeating until it's become second nature. In other words, until you don't notice it anymore. Like if you play a musical instrument, as I used to do very badly, after a while, you learn this really difficult piece and be very painful. And then there's some point where you can just play the musical instrument. It's actually easy. And not only is it easy, you can't actually imagine how it ever was that you weren't able to do this. Well, that's your brain has changed shape. You've changed your habit set. So this is what we're talking about when it comes to your personal operating model. It's those set of habits that govern hundreds or even thousands of small daily behaviors.
Lovely. I love your analogy of the change your water path from the water stream. Beautiful. I'm going to move quickly because there are questions and I really want, Angus, that you must answer all of them for our listeners today. So next question is from Vikram. He says, what's your view on the knowing-doing gap that most consultants suffer from, especially when it comes to personal health?
So the knowing-doing gap.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Right. This brings back some painful, even some shivers to me, as I remember. We had a framework at McKinsey about knowing, being, and doing. And I'd like to offer perhaps an alternative framing that perhaps I wish I'd had as well. And I want to draw a distinction between skills and attitudes. Now, skills are very, very important. For example, knowing how to give feedback. There's a very clear methodology for this, and I'm grateful to have this. And if I need to give somebody feedback, I go through the 3 steps, and that's a skill that I've learned. And that was very much, I think, a knowing sort of type of thing. But when it comes to leadership, I think leadership at the end of the day is much more an attitudinal thing. It's how you view things that then governs your behaviors. And so I think it's important when you're thinking of leadership to think in terms of attitudinal development rather than specific skills. So, for example, one of the things we talk an awful lot about at Potential Life is playing to your strengths, your character strengths, which we associate to being aware of your magic. What's your magic? What makes you different to everybody else? In a culture that tends to be normative, when we are all trying to align to some corporate criteria, what true flourishing says is we should be celebrating how we're all different from each other. By the way, this is fantastic for diversity and inclusion because it goes to the very essence of the power of diversity as we celebrate what's different. There's so much attitudinal development behind this idea. And then maybe you'll discover what some of your character strengths are. I could tell you the story of my life journey when it comes to character strengths. This has been a journey of awareness and deliberate practice, but it's not that I was given a toolkit saying this is how you apply strengths on day one and then the problem has gone away. So I just wanted to offer a little bit of just thinking on that. And actually, seeing as we're on character strengths, I will, if you permit me, because it is such an important subject. And if I could just leave some of you today with a flag in your head wow, I really need to go and have a think about that whole character strength stuff, that would be my gift to you. You know, my story was that at university, I studied pure maths. Pure maths. So very abstract type of stuff, the kind of stuff that most people think is weird. And then a few years later, I was starting my career at McKinsey. And I think my elders at McKinsey, they took a very quick look at my CV. They saw the word maths, and they immediately put me onto some financial modeling projects, which I can do. I can play with numbers. That's not a problem. And I did that. I didn't know any better. And then after about 2 years, I found myself for the first time on what's called a strategy engagement. And it was as though a light bulb went off in my head. Because for me, strategy, which is about taking a complex world, seeing patterns and explaining it and making it more simple, is exactly like the same kind of mental model as pure mathematics, which is all about patterns. And so this was the beginning of a moment in my professional career when my career, instead of just functioning, actually started to take off. So this notion of flourishing, if you like. And I wasn't applying pure maths to strategy. It was just more the certain way of approaching problems, a form of cognitive intelligence. And then as the years went by, it became more of a skill of communication for me, because I found myself seeing things more simply. I could express them in simple terms. So it became a character strength of communication. And indeed, the work that Tal and I have done together, Tal is my co-founder, he's very much the encyclopedic scientist in our marriage. And I'm the great simplifier. I'm the deliberate layman in our marriage, looking for ways of understanding that I can understand, and hopefully everybody else can understand. So this character strength that relates to simplification has become a thread throughout my whole life, and I'm sure it will continue. I'm grateful now to be reasonably aware of it. I'm sure I still have a journey to go. It would have been fantastic if I'd known more about this much earlier on, so I could consciously shape my development rather than let it sort of happen to me somewhat by accident, should we say.
Wow. Character strengths, really nice. Thank you for sharing that, Angus. I'm conscious that we are 7 minutes to the hour, and there are at least 7, 8 questions I can see. So I'm going to make a request for the participants and of you, Angus, so that we may take 5 extra minutes.
Sure.
But we'll try and go with this. Some very interesting questions coming up. There's one from Santosh Kamath. He says, Angus, our work involves high level of multitasking, many unconnected jobs. Is the suggestion then to focus on fewer tasks and do them more deeply and let go of many of the tasks? I think this is a real struggle that we have. So yeah, your views, please.
First of all, Santosh, thank you for asking this question. This is something that ordinarily I would have already brought up, but somehow I forgot. So now I get to mention this. Now, the challenge with multitasking is that it's a term that applies to 2 very distinct things, and we tend to mix it all up and therefore get confused. So one definition of multitasking has to do with the ability to manage in parallel multiple agendas. So over the course of the week, I'm managing this project, and I'm doing something here and doing something here, something there. And most people, as you progress through professional services, there's a moment when you become a junior manager or a manager when multitasking comes in. That, of course, is very important, and it's as important now as it probably will be in 20 years as it was 20 years ago. However, there's another point about multitasking, which is at any moment in time, there's only ever one thing happening inside your brain. And a lot of us, when we think we're multitasking, in reality, we're actually zero tasking. We're just staring at our to-do lists, waiting to get started, hopping between Facebook, emails, the news, the football scores, and just kind of, we're actually just not doing anything. And so there's a great prize to be had in terms of discovering a pocket of productivity that you didn't know existed. Is by replacing zero tasking, which happens to carry a banner called multitasking, but it's actually zero tasking, and replace that by monotasking, or if you like, serial monotasking. And I think if you're able to do this in the way you go about your work instantaneously, combining this with your ability to manage multiple agendas at the same time, then you're really going to tap into a sweet spot of your personal performance, and hopefully deal with this slightly dichotomous thinking when we associate the word multitasking with two distinct things.
Wonderful. And I think with that, you also answered Vineet's question, which was, is multitasking bad? You kind of touched on that too. Yeah. Shrija has another interesting question. She says, in the example you mentioned earlier about the two people in your book, between the two individuals with the same background, what was the one that was successful doing as compared to the other?
So I would talk to there are actually 5 things. So in reality, it's a cocktail of 5 things that all together create this powerful thing. And we've talked about some of these, so I won't revisit the ones we've talked about. But one of them is knowing your true character strengths or your signature strengths. This is your personal magic. Felicity, for example, had a fantastic way of engaging with teams, but was terrible when it comes to attention to detail. Now, instead of being obsessed by the fact she wasn't very good with attention to detail, she found an offsetting measure, which to find a junior manager who's willing to take that burden on, and she could focus on bringing the team together. So daring to play to your passion, not be obsessed by the bits that are not working, but finding a resolution nevertheless. That's a very, very important thing. The other thing we talked about was recovery. We've talked all about that, this idea of really owning your energy management. And it's not just about your own energy, it's about how much energy do you bring to your world. Are you a radiator of energy? What happens when you walk into a room? Does the temperature go up or does the temperature go down? When you walk into a room, does everybody's eyes lift up or does everybody kind of eyes look down? I think we all know which is the better of those two types of answers. And this fundamentally all comes down to whether you're radiating or draining energy. We've also talked about relationships, how important it is to have what I call best friend type relationships. And a lot of people struggle with the concept of a best friend at work because, you know, what happens if you're supposed to fire somebody and it's your best friend? So what's important is not so much that it is your best friend, but you understand, and this sounds a terrible term, but you understand the functionality of best friendship. And best friends, not only do they care, you care for each other, but you're very direct and straight with each other. There's the authenticity combined with the positivity. And this is such an important cocktail, which is so difficult for many people to do at the same time. So here, I've just been sort of elaborating on this cocktail of things.
Cocktail of character strengths. One, beautiful. I'm going to take 2 last questions and I will have to close after that. But Sarabjit Singh says, does flow change significantly when one moves between organizations? How much is flow driven, was self-driven versus the environment in which one works?
Yeah, environment is very, very important. I'm not going to put a percentage like 70% environment and 37% personal, but there is no doubt that environment is a massive driver of flow. And so as leaders, there is a responsibility to create environments that make flow easier. One very important thing for me, for example, is when I'm working on a document, I'm writing a report, I'm actually quite an introverted sort of worker. I like to quietly do my stuff. And I noticed that when I was in our Potential Life office in London, which is a big open space office, if I've been away for a week, then everybody wants to have a quick chat with me because they've tried some new thing out and they want to see what I think and all sorts of great stuff. And I realized the worst thing I could do would be to try to work on my document whilst everybody's coming over to talk to me, because I would neither be giving myself fully to them, so they leave frustrated, and I'm not doing my document particularly well either. So that's an environmental problem. And the answer is actually very simple: to make a choice. If I'm really going to work on my document, I'm going to go up to the 5th floor, hide in a cubicle, and do it really, really well because I'm in flow on that document. And then when I'm with the team, I'm going to symbolically close my computer so everybody can see it and give myself fully to everybody and thoroughly enjoy it as well. It's not that I didn't want to speak to other people. I was just preoccupied by something else. So again, an environmental thing, but we can tilt the odds in our favor.
Yeah, and Sarabjit, earlier in the conversation, Angus also spoke about how organizations can do things like clearly call out times when people cannot be disturbed and create an environment where people don't get disturbed. Great, we're going to go into our last question, looking at my eyes on the watch, but one last question, which is from Kamal Jain, who says, could you share some more details on how we can achieve flow in a multitasking environment, which is beyond better time management?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to realize that really getting to flow is going to probably take 20 minutes or so. And it only takes one little thing to take you out. So that's the kind of, that's the height of the hurdle, if you like.
So it takes 20 minutes to get to flow.
Yeah, typically it'll take 20 minutes before you finally kind of really in there. Now, another thing you can do is what you want to do is release the constraining factors. So one thing you can do is to set an alarm. That way you've outsourced the problem of overrunning something, knowing that you will get an alarm. So maybe if it's an alarm after 23 minutes, you won't have had much flow time. So but if there's some really, really important thing that's happening, let's say you're starting something at 9 in the morning and you know you need to be done by 12, instead of constantly glancing at your clock, wondering whether it's 12 o'clock, just put an alarm. And then that way you've released a constraint and you give yourself more chance of actually getting there. And likewise, switch off the internet. It's horrible and impossible feeling, but so much stuff is beeping at us. Switch it off, switch your phone off, switch the internet off. Give yourself every chance you can. And a big part of the reasons why it doesn't work is because technology-related things sort of call us back.
Okay, if you can answer this in 1 minute, I'm going to take this question because Manas has asked us at multiple forums. Manas's question is it possible to have flow in small group teams? Say, for example, brainstorming session or in an intense deadline phase of project?
Oh, yes. Yes, I think it's one of the most joyous sort of activities in life. And we don't need to limit this thinking to work-related contexts. Imagine, I remember I used to play football. I used to love, in particular, playing five-a-side football. And we could just, literally, we would have lost all notion of time as a team. We'd go for hours. So that's definitely something to strive for. Of course, you need to have all of the team members feeling like they're all in this together. Yeah. So in a way, the barriers to entry are higher because everybody has to sort of go through that 20-minute sort of entry hurdle. But once you get there, it can be really very, very, very fantastic.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angus. That's a great note to end on. Thank you. I think what we really gained from what we heard today is a lot of little but very important steps that we can take to be in flow. And this is really what matters, because when this the rubber hits the road, what we really want are small things that will make it happen for us. And thank you so much for making the time, and apologies for a little extra that we took, but I'm sure it goes to tell you how much we enjoyed the session today. To all
My
our
pleasure.
participants, listeners, thank you. It's been wonderful to have you. Thank you.